Hello and welcome to Stories of the Sun and Moon, told by me, Dawn Nelson, a professional storyteller with a passion for nature, landscape and heritage connection. As we follow the Wheel of the Year, I will be sharing folk tales from the English and Scandinavian traditions that focus on the sun and the moon, the light and the dark, the day and the night. September arrives, and with it our fifth stop in our journey to celebrate the sun and the moon. Mabon, celebrated around the 21st of September, is the equinox and celebrates the abundance we may find in the hedgerows and fields, the fruits and vegetables that will keep us sustained in the coming months. It's a time for preserving this abundance in pickles and chutneys to harness the goodness for winter. This story celebrates the sun and the gifts it has brought us in the harvest with a strange and peculiar English legend which tells of two children who would only eat broad beans. As the bells rang out for church, two strangers walked across the meadows, hunched and squinting at the sun. A woman, late back from church, walking across the adjacent, recently stubbled fields, saw them first. And when she did, she approached them to ask them where they might have come from, for she did not recognise them as anyone that lived in the village. Lost they were, and the words they spoke were not those of her country. Their skin was tinged with green and their pupils pinpricked with the light. Their faces gaunt with worry and hunger, she hurried them home to her little cottage where she lived with her husband and children in the village of Woolpit. All five of them would normally be working in the fields, but that day they were at home. It was the Sabbath after all. They were busy putting out the bread and butter for mid-morning victuals, filling up the old copper kettle that hung over the fire and laughing about how the vicar had said this or that in the morning sermon, and how red in the face he had gone when one of the newest babies in the congregation had squawked in the middle of his profound words. The family fell silent when the woman came in with the green children, before crowding around to ask who they were and where they were from. She shushes them and tells them to bring the children some food, but the strangers refuse all the food that is offered to them. Bread, ham, apples, cheese, nothing seems to please them until the woman notices their gaze is fixed on the broad beans at the end of the kitchen table. That year there had been a plentiful crop of broad beans, and one end of the kitchen table was near enough covered in them, spilling out from the wicker basket. The woman had been salting and preserving them for the dark days of winter, and she took a couple of the full pods and offered them to the children. They took them quick as you like and devoured them. The woman watched as they ate. She knew she'd have to speak to the village council sooner rather than later, for it would not be long before the presence of the children would be noticed and questions would be asked. And so that evening, whilst the green children slept in the same beds as her own children, she called the elders together. She told them all she knew of the children, that they had come from the direction of the Woolpits on the edge of the village, and no one, not no one, knew who they were. She explained that she thought perhaps they might be Flemish and feared for their lives, as the king at that time was much aggrieved with those fleeing Flanders from famine to find a home in England. She explained further how she thought perhaps their parents had been the victims of the king's harsh foreign policy and begged the rest of the village to keep them safe and quiet there. They agreed, but it wasn't long before the lord of the manor up the way took a fancy to the young girl. She had wild ways that appealed to him, and so he offered her employment. The brother went with her too, but records show that he didn't last. He was frail and the work was too much. He died just under a year after the woman found him that day walking across the meadow. Pneumonia, they say it was. The girl went on to marry the lord, lived a good life, learnt English, and in time ate more than just broad beans. That said, it was told that the lord would still pay a good penny to anyone providing the sweetest broad beans grown that summer for his beloved Woolpit girl. In later years, once she'd learnt English words, she would often gather the children in the village square and tell them of how she and her brother had come from a subterranean fairy world where there was no light and everything was green. She told them that on that day, when the woman found them, they had journeyed through underground tunnels, eventually walking out into the sunlight, where they had become blinded and disorientated. They had followed the ringing of the bells from the church towards the village, and that's when they'd been found. Of course there was gossip that this was not the case at all. Whilst the villagers believed in the good folk of the land, they knew them to be elusive and tricksy, not at all like those children had been. The local doctor muttered that the children must have been victims of some sort of plague or ailment, and that they had been given a tincture of arsenic to try and cure them. It is known that arsenic can leave a green tinge on the skin if consumed regularly. Perhaps the plague had taken their parents and the children were left to roam as orphans until they were found. If the girl was Flemish, then her story of a subterranean world kept her safe in many ways and allowed her to dance in the sun without fear of the authorities. And the woman who found them was glad of that. And so are those in the pub this night who, I have no doubt, still tell this tale and will do for many more years to come. The Green Children of Woolpit is a legend that is over 900 years old, originating in the county of Suffolk, England, and retold by myself, Dawn Nelson. Woolpit is a village in Suffolk, and it is thought to have been called this because of the deep pits dug on the outer edges of the village, called wolf pits. These were dug to protect the villagers' livestock from the wolves. If you visit that village in Suffolk, you'll find there's a little sign marking the entrance to the village with the 2 green children of Woolpit.